This channel is part of the History Hit network.
Today we're taking you inside one of the world's first factories, Quarrybank Mill in Manchester. It opened in 1784 and operated continuously for 175 years, producing vast quantities of cotton thread and fabric. Now a working museum, visited by almost 200,000 people a year, Quarrybank is one of the best preserved textile mills in the world, giving us direct access to our manufacturing heritage. We'll be taking you back in time to meet the people, many of them as young as 9, at the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and exploring other turning points in our history. Oz Clarke gets hands-on with the weaponry at the heart of a military revolution, the English Civil War.
That's fantastic.
Dan Jones joins an archaeological dig, revealing the secrets of a long-lost culture.
This actually looks rather like a sort of kind of dragon's claw.
And John Culshaw uncovers the bizarre habits of an aristocratic playboy who upset the status quo.
Unleash Bimbo the dog-faced baboon. That'll give him something to think about.
But first, I'm seeing where Britain's manufacturing industry began. This is Quarrybank Mill on the outskirts of Manchester. In the 18th century, this cotton mill was one of the largest factories on earth at a time when the very idea of a factory was a radical new concept. For centuries, cotton production had taken place in people's homes. It was low-tech and labour-intensive. But by the 1780s, technology was transforming the spinning and weaving of cotton. Belfast-born Samuel Gregg was at the forefront of this change, investing in cutting-edge machinery to produce cotton on an unprecedented scale. And the mill's picturesque location, 11 miles outside Manchester, was no accident. It was chosen because of this, the River Bollin. Long before steam engines, it was water that kick-started the Industrial Revolution. This is the heart of the factory, and in many ways the heart of the Industrial Revolution. Water wheels like this could generate in excess of 100 horsepower, powering enormous machinery that could produce cotton at such a rate that it very quickly made Samuel Gregg an extremely rich man. There were more than 300 machines in operation at this mill. They could spin an astonishing 36,000 miles of thread a day. Claire Brown is introducing me to this game-changing technology.
This is our spinning mule.
Mule?
Yeah, so this is actually spinning the threads. There's 560 spindles on here. So imagine that you've got 560 women all spinning at the same time on a spinning wheel. This is what this is equivalent to.
Oh, gosh. This exponential increase in production was the death knell for handmade textiles. Hand spinners and weavers were out of a job. But these groundbreaking machines didn't run themselves. They needed an army of mill workers to keep them running round the clock. At its peak, 500 people worked here. So when this room was full of people, all the looms going, paint me a picture of what it would have felt like, what it would have been like to have worked in here.
Well, working in the mill would have been very hot and humid because that was required for the cotton. It would have been very dusty. We're talking long hours, people working till, for 12 hours or more. So it would be relentless. It's very repetitive work, very, very tiring.
Conditions were brutal. Even more so when you learn that nearly half these mill workers were children, risking their lives around dangerous machines. This was indeed the dark side of industrial progress. Quarrybank Mill has sat here on the River Bollin for more than 230 years. It was one of hundreds of cotton mills at the forefront of the Industrial Revolution, churning out thousands of miles of fabric every year, helping to turn Britain into an industrial powerhouse. But beyond the impressive mechanics and deafening noise, there's a heart-rending story of the people who worked here.
Most of them unskilled and unpaid, who were prepared to work in dangerous and difficult conditions in return for food and board. So began a generation of child factory workers.
Some as young as 9. Claire Brown is an expert on their working conditions.
Were they well paid?
I think the simple answer to that is no. You know, if you're a child, you don't get any money. What you get is a roof over your head and food.
So that was it. So it was virtually slavery.
Euphemistically called apprentices, these children were at constant risk of injury from the dangerous machines they worked around.
The worst machine to work with is actually the carding engine. If your hand feeds in with the cotton, then it's called degloving because it strips your hands of flesh and skin. So it's like taking a glove off.
Oh,
if it's
my
taking your skin off.
goodness! Shivers down my spine.
But the most notorious machine was the spinning mule.
It's a sort of nightmarish machine, really. I find it very scary, all these cogs. And it must have been very dangerous to operate, wasn't it?
It was definitely very dangerous. I mean, you would have 5 people working in here, so
Along this row.
You'd have your mule operator who was looking after several mules, but then he would employ what were called pieces. So they would be men who mended the broken ends. So you might have 2 of those, and then you would have small pieces as well, which could be children. Now they would be piecing up, they were mending the ends by walking back with the machine, so that's very dangerous.
If you tripped off?
Well, it would literally run over you.
Goodness.
I'm having a go, thankfully with the machine stationary.
So they're the broken ones?
Yes, so we have 2 broken ends here, so you need to find the thread first of all, and you're going to piece that by twisting the 2 together. Like so.
So now they're joined on, and they would have done that while it was moving?
Yes, they would.
Piecing was dangerous enough, but the job known as scavenging could be fatal.
So for the children, once the carriage moves out, they can then get down underneath the frame.
While it's moving?
While it's moving, so you'd follow the carriage out, and then can you see all the dust builds up on the carriage here, and the dust builds up on the metal plate here. This is the bits that they would be cleaning.
So they're cleaning this while it's in operation, while it's moving?
Yes. They then have to get out of here before this comes back in, so they have to listen and know when the changeover is. We had a young boy called John Foden who was working under a machine like this. He was cleaning, and we don't know exactly what happened, but we know that he didn't get out of the machine in time. The carriage moved back in, and it squashed his head between the roller beam and the carriage, and killed him outright. He was only just 12.
Gosh, times you just don't want to go back to.
Safety was secondary to profit and output in the white heat of the 19th century's Industrial Revolution. Centuries before, a more violent age had left battle-scarred castles in the wake of previous attempts to upturn society. Dunster Castle on the Bristol Channel in Somerset was witness to the most ambitious of these uprisings, the English Civil War. Wine expert and amateur historian Oz Clarke headed there to reveal its part in this 17th century military revolution.
This is the perfect site for a castle.
impregnable, impenetrable. It still stands magnificent. The first stone castle here was built just after the Norman conquest, one of the original Motte and Bailey castles.
Dunster's gatehouse is all that remains of the 12th century castle, and this has borne witness to some of the bloodiest scenes in the castle's history, never more so than during the English Civil War.
In 1645, Dunster was under the control of King Charles's royalist forces. Outside the walls, the opposing Roundheads laid siege to the castle and thought they'd capture it in no time. I'm learning about their strategies from Martin Harborne.
They had a brand new publication, and that was the Manual of Warfare. It told you exactly how to take a castle on a hill.
Describe what I'm looking at here.
All the cannons are pointing at the same point of the wall and firing simultaneously.
And low down the wall.
Low down, to knock the bottom of the wall out so the top would come tumbling down.
So cannons, were they not particularly accurate at that time?
Not particularly, no, but they would get a range within 2 or 3 cannon fires of more or less. So if you have 40-odd cannons all firing simultaneously at the same point, it's going to give that warmth into the wall.
Fire!
These devastating cannons weren't the only weapons used by the attacking forces. They were also equipped with the 17th century's most up-to-date firearm, the musket. I'm learning how to load one.
Magazine there.
The Roundheads could do this in just 30 seconds.
Straight down.
Straight down. Yeah, that's it.
That's fantastic.
Hundreds of soldiers armed to the teeth with muskets and cannons, swarming towards the castle. This looks like a one-sided fight, but it wasn't. Inside Dunster, they had decided to fight dirty with a secret weapon.
A piece of wood.
It doesn't look very dangerous.
It doesn't look very good. Piece of wood cut into 4, hollowed out, and inside 60 musket balls.
Loaded into the cannons on the battlements, they split apart as they were fired.
60 musket balls at 180 miles an hour in a fan would rake down the side of the hill.
It's like the sort of earliest form of machine gun.
Indeed it is, yeah.
They also had another nasty surprise for the attackers.
That is where these little guys come in.
Hand grenades.
They dip them into their braziers, and then they throw them over the wall. They roll down the hill and explode right in front of all the troops running up. So you can see we're much better equipped for defending the castle than the big cannons on the other side of the hill.
And those blokes were battering these walls,
Yep.
and they didn't get through.
The Royalists held out for an astonishing 6 months.
Only 20 men defending the castle lost their lives. Dunster stood firm, just as it does today.
This castle made it through the siege. A survivor against the odds. Quarry Bank's part in history is just as proud. The revolution that took place here ushered in the modern mechanical age. The mill ran on hydropower from the river and cheap child labour. The employees already worked 12 hours each day, but Mother Nature wasn't as controllable as the workforce. The river often ran dry and stopped the water wheel running, which brought cotton production to a standstill. The solution was a new piece of tech, an early steam engine. Alan Ayres looks after it.
So in 1810, this was state-of-the-art.
Oh, this was your Rolls-Royce, this was your Concorde of the day.
But of course it required yet more people to keep it going.
The staff who do the engineering on this site were the highest paid in the mill at the time. And if you were doing that, you'd made your name.
Is that the case today with you?
I'm a volunteer, so payment is in biscuits.
It seems to be cooking nicely. Can we power it up and get it going?
We can certainly power it up, but I think you need a pair of gloves.
Oh, you know, when I was a boy, I did want to be an engine driver. This is probably as near as I'm going to get, isn't it?
Let's go down and give it a go.
For a steam buff like me, this is a real thrill.
It's just sort of sitting here,
It's sitting
throbbing
here.
at the
So,
moment, isn't it?
I think what I want you to do is to close off that yellow valve down there.
Right, that's shut.
And now I want you then to turn this another quarter of a turn.
Anti-clockwise.
Yeah, like that. Let's see what happens.
It's moving. Way. It really is living, breathing, isn't it? There's a humanity about these machines, isn't there? It's amazing.
Steam gave Samuel Gregg a consistent power supply and transformed this mill into one of the largest and most productive in Britain. To celebrate his wealth and pride in his factory, he built his family home right beside it.
But while the Greggs lived comfortably and in some style overlooking their mill, further up the hill, the unpaid workers, well, they had rather a different life.
I've come here to the apprentice house to find out what life was like for these child labourers, from archive manager Ali Silica.
This is Spartan in the extreme, isn't it? No interior sprung here. Gosh, box beds. How many to a bed, Ali?
There would have been two to a bed.
Goodness me. And really basic. And crammed in, presumably.
Yes, there would have been more beds here, yes.
After a 12-hour working day in the mill, the children came back here and did their schoolwork. The boys learned to read. The girls did embroidery.
So how many apprentices altogether would there have been in this house?
At the peak, it would have been between 90 and 100.
In this one house?
In this one house.
Who was looking after them in here?
There would have been a superintendent, so someone who would look after them, usually a married couple. They would buy in the food, ensure that the washing was done.
Goodness me, it's just, it feels really kind of austere and chilling almost.
Life here was punishing, but hard as it was, it offered children a roof over their heads and gave them a trade that could become a job for life. Poor parents who couldn't provide for their children often applied to send them here. Ali has some poignant evidence.
This is a letter which was sent from a man called Peter Jackson, and he's written to the clerk at Quarry Bank, asking if there was any space to bring his two daughters.
You're aware that I have two daughters. I know well that the means I have at my disposal will neither feed nor educate them, and I hope to be successful, viz. Of sending them to the apprentice house. So he's obviously on his uppers. He's got no money to look after them.
Yeah, he doesn't want his daughters turned up in the workhouse or on the streets of Manchester.
So he's prepared to submit them to this. Oh, sir, when I walk through the streets of Manchester and see the hundreds of young girls from 14 to 20 years of age, as common as the dirt under my feet, and as void of shame as the brutes of the field, I cannot guarantee that they shall not come to that. This is just a man who's at his wit's end, isn't it? I'm a father of two daughters. This is a father of two daughters, and he's sending them to this because that's his only option. Did they come here?
No, they didn't.
They didn't?
No.
What happened? Do we know?
We don't know.
Wow. What a thought.
Personal testimony like this brings the past vividly to life. But the further back we go, the harder it is to connect with the lives of our ancestors. Hidden beneath the ground, precious evidence of their lives is at the mercy of the elements, never more so than along the coast. The cliffs, known as the Seven Sisters, are some of the most fragile in the country. archaeological records here are in danger of disappearing into the sea. Historian Dan Jones went to unearth their secrets.
I'm in Sussex, beneath the unmistakable chalk cliffs of our southeastern coastline. Now, just above me is the beautifully named Bell Toot, one of 7 iconic cliffs known collectively as the Seven Sisters.
Coastal erosion claims sections of these cliffs every year, as this dramatic footage from 2014 shows. In prehistoric times, this was home to a group of people belonging to the Beaker culture. They lived in a hilltop settlement here. And with each rockfall, priceless evidence of their day-to-day existence is vanishing forever. Which is why the Trust are excavating the site in an archaeological race against time. Tom Dommett has invited me along to see the work in progress at this closed dig.
So, when the Beaker culture arrived, what would this place have looked like?
Well, 4,500 years ago, this place would have been about 2 kilometres inland.
2 kilometres?
2 kilometres, yeah.
That's amazing.
The rate of coastal erosion has left us looking at a landscape that is very, very different from that which the people who lived here would have experienced.
And presumably, I mean, there's a physical risk, isn't there, that this is all going to fall into the sea? I mean, not next year, but soon.
Eventually, we have to accept we are going to lose this site.
So it's dig it now or lose it forever.
That's it.
This is a rare opportunity to excavate a prehistoric site. 60 volunteers are searching for fragments that will reveal the lives lived here more than 4,000 years ago.
What's happening here?
These little bags are marking the spots of all of the finds, the artefacts that are coming out from this layer.
Can we have a look at some?
Yeah, let's take a look. Oh, there you go.
Wow, this actually looks rather like a sort of kind of dragon's claw or something like that, but what is it?
It's a beautiful flint tool, a piece of worked flint. In this case, you can see the sickle shape of it, and you quite rightly hold it in your hand that way.
So what might it have been used for?
Well, it's a perfect cutting tool, particularly for, say, harvesting grain, harvesting wheat.
I'm going to see if I can find anything, with the help of Buffy Bennett, who's already been digging here for a week.
Can I have a go?
Yeah, of course you can.
So am I doing it right? Because I don't seem to have come across anything so far.
No.
I was expecting instant gratification.
It can take hours.
It's painstaking work. Finds are few and far between.
Have you found anything
No,
yet?
I found absolutely nothing. I mean, I may have swept an entire beaker into the
into the ocean.
I mean, I found a tiny fragment here, but I don't know what that could possibly. Ooh.
That's a fragment of chalk.
Fragment of
Sorry
chalk.
about this.
We're not interested in the chalk, people. No.
No.
That's a shame.
But keep going. You will.
Going.
You'll definitely find something.
The hope is that artefacts will help to confirm the exact date this site was populated. And it seems I've hit the jackpot.
Oh, hello. Oh, what's this?
You have found a piece of pottery.
How about that?
But where did you find it?
Just
you must
here,
mark
exactly
it.
here.
Okay, mark it there.
Okay.
A fantastic piece.
A fantastic piece of beaker.
That is a nice piece of pottery. Well done.
How about that?
I was very
Found
impressed.
some beaker at last.
It may not look much, but this is a chunk of one of the pottery drinking vessels that the beakers are named after.
Very, very
I thought
impressed.
it was never going to happen. I think you thought it was never going to happen as well.
Well, I must
I
say,
could feel everyone around me losing
I'm not
faith.
jealous. I'm normally green.
But that
That's the best piece we've found all
is
week.
actually quite
Isn't
nice,
it?
isn't it? Well, let's bag it up.
Bag it up.
It turns out I've stumbled on the largest piece of pottery the team have unearthed on the entire site.
Beginner's luck.
Well done. Now keep digging.
Oh, right. Okay. I thought that was it.
No.
Oh.
I've been incredibly lucky, but everything that emerges from the ground here is adding to archaeologists' understanding of this ancient settlement and the people who lived here.
Thank goodness, because in a few years, all of this cliff top will be gone and its secrets will be lost forever.
The secrets of 19th century Quarrybank Mill are better documented and easier to access because the evidence is still here to see. Its private archives provide a unique window into a world of almost 2 centuries of industrial history and are normally off-limits to visitors. There are more than 16,000 items in the store here, from personal letters and photos to this 100-year-old poster.
Oh, rules! Oh, my goodness. Any person coming too late should be fined as follows. For 5 minutes, twopence, 10 minutes, fourpence, and 15 minutes, sixpence, etc. Any person leaving their work, this would have been me, and found talking with any of the other work people should be fined twopence for each offence. You could lose your entire wage here. This is a treasure trove for an archivist. Do you open boxes that you don't know what's in?
Yes, we're still going through boxes that we have no idea what's in there, and that's what makes it all so special.
What have we got here?
This is an apprentice indenture.
One of the oldest and most precious artefacts. It's a contract between mill owner Samuel Gregg and one of his child workers.
So this is what they would have had to sign to say they would stay?
Yes.
1785.
Yes, and this is the earliest indenture we have.
So this is the parents, in effect, signing over their child?
It's not actually the parents. We know that Thomas Royley, who this agreement is made with, came from the workhouse in Stafford. So it wasn't his parents signing him over, it was actually the overseers of the poor.
What can we tell about Thomas Royley? Anything from this?
Well, we can tell that he was an orphan, or his family couldn't look after him, that's why he's in the workhouse. But also, we can also tell that he can't read or write, because he's just made his mark here, which is just an X, just there.
His mark? Goodness. It must have been a scary document for him to put his mark on. It looks even now terribly official. Seals down the side. He must have been frightened when he put it, in a way, signing his life away, isn't he? It's real Oliver Twist stuff, isn't it?
Thomas Royley and hundreds of other children like him lived and worked here at the sharp end of industrialisation. Throughout this revolutionary period, life was changing fast. Seismic shifts in science were also altering how people thought about the natural world. The beautiful gardens at Biddulph Grange in Staffordshire reflect the Victorian struggle with Darwin's theory of evolution and what that meant for their religious beliefs. Clive Aslett, editor-at-large for Country Life magazine, went to discover how one man set out to explore one of the biggest mysteries of all using gardening.
For me, visiting a beautiful garden like this is like listening to a piece of music where different themes and moods unfold as you go through it.
But I've never experienced anything like this before. You begin with Italian-style borders, then turn a corner to find an Egyptian temple. 1 minute you're in an English woodland,
and the next minute you're 7,000 kilometres away in China.
20 separate areas mimic the appearance and flora of different parts of the world. It's the result of more than 20 years of plant collecting by Victorian horticulturalist James Bateman. He brought specimens from every corner of the globe. There are anemones and acers from the Far East and dahlias from Central America.
These have to be the most glorious dahlias I've ever seen. When Bateman was planting them, dahlias were new, so he was really at the cutting edge of horticulture.
The result is an international garden with treats at every turn.
But what if I was to tell you that all these gardens represent one man's idea of his place in creation?
This place was Bateman's attempt to prove the existence of God. The evidence is in an astonishing fossil gallery that was originally the entrance to the garden. Paleontologist Nigel Larkin is restoring it.
Nigel, hello.
Hello, how are you?
Hello. This is quite a strange space, isn't it? Holes in the wall here, bits of stone sticking out here. What's going on?
Well, this is a unique gallery. There's nothing else like this anywhere in the world. Bateman created this in 1862. And Bateman grew up as someone who's a Christian. He believed in the Bible. Then suddenly all these fossils are being found when people are mining for coal, that kind of thing.
As a Christian, Bateman believed that God created heaven and earth in 6 days. But with the discovery of fossils showing gradual evolution over hundreds of millions of years, he had to reconcile his religious belief with the scientific evidence.
He started saying that maybe these days in the Bible weren't literal 24-hour days, but periods of time during which these animals, may have evolved, if you like.
So he's trying to marry the fossil record with the biblical story in Genesis.
Down the gallery you have days 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 and 6, and then you would actually normally enter the gardens this way. You'd pass through these days of creation and end up in the Garden of Eden, the world as it is now, you see.
All this was leading to the garden, which was supposed to represent the 7th day of creation, when God rested.
Biddulph Grange is a garden of wonder and delight. And how fantastic it is that this is being restored so that future generations can understand James Bateman's thinking.
A Victorian attempt to marry religion and science. Its beauty needs no explanation.
The Industrial Revolution altered our cities and our landscape forever. When Quarry Bank was built, the surrounding Cheshire countryside was populated with little more than a few farmhouses. 20 years later, it was a thriving industrial hub. But mill owner Samuel Gregg had a problem.
He needed to entice people from further afield to come and work in his factory, but being so far from central Manchester, they'd need somewhere to live. So he built this, Style Village.
Workers' cottages, a church, a chapel and a school made up the village, all built between 1806 and 1831.
It's quite picturesque, isn't it? It's a bit like a sort of rural version of Coronation Street.
It is a bit, yes.
I'm with General Manager Eleanor Underhill.
So how many people, Eleanor, would have been living in this village?
Well, we think about 400.
What were conditions like? I mean, they look quite picturesque now. Were they relatively primitive when they were made?
Well, they were better than the alternative in Manchester, and the housing was considered of a good standard. They had their own privy. If they'd been in Manchester, they would have shared a privy with many other families, but each house had its own privy, and they had an allotment at the front so they could grow their own food, and they had fresh air. So, yes, conditions were fairly good, really.
Presumably a lot of them would have spent their entire working lives here, living in these houses.
Yeah, so the cottage would have been tied with the job, and they would have stayed in that job for their lives.
It feels lovely. There's a wonderful atmosphere. Very peaceful, as you say, very rural. So to be working and living in such an intensely industrial environment, just a walk round the corner back to where you lived, you've got peace and quiet.
Mill workers lived in these cottages until the middle of the 20th century. Today, most of them have been modernised and are rented out. But one remains untouched. It's like stepping back in time.
Oh, this lino brings back memories. Goodness me. Gaslight.
Yes. And nobody's lived in here since the 50s.
It's not that long ago that we lived like this, is it? Most of us lived like this. So, 2 bedrooms upstairs, scullery, living room.
Yes, and somebody might have been sleeping here, depending on the circumstances.
So this could have absolutely crowded then with people. And more downstairs.
But most would have been out at work during the day.
Right.
Probably mother as well.
Yeah.
In the mill.
And this was happening in every single house down this road.
Yes. And they were living closely together. And they didn't get away from each other because they were together at work as well.
This was a carefully constructed society, where what was good for the mill was also good for the workers. It's a model of benevolence at the heart of many of Britain's grand country estates, where the landowner would support his estate workers. But this wasn't the story everywhere. Tredegar House, near Newport in Wales, was home to a flamboyant character who neglected aristocratic duty in favour of selfish pleasure-seeking. Comedian John Culshaw went to investigate.
On the surface, Tredegar looks every inch the home of nobility. But if you adjust the angle of your view ever so slightly away from these striking red bricks and the elegant architecture, you'll see something perhaps slightly less than a country setting. Instead of sweeping views of uninterrupted fields, from one side, there's the view of the M4. And on the other, an altogether more modern estate. What events could have led to a house of such obvious wealth, having such unlikely neighbours? It's all down to a pleasure-seeking 1930s playboy called Evan Morgan, the second Viscount Tredegar. Historian Paul Busby reveals the truth about this colourful personality.
He was a fantasist, so he wound these wonderful fantasies around himself. But he was such an invigorating personality. He didn't know what he was going to do next, but he was always immensely charming with it. So a bit of a loose cannon, really.
He'd flirted with being a poet and a journalist before landing on a career in the church.
He enlisted to train for the priesthood at the Pontifical Beda College in Rome, but he didn't attend lectures very often. He would send his valet in disguise in a cassock to take notes, while he was swanning around at the Hotel Bernini around the corner, arm in arm with the Siamese ape. After a while, the Monsignor told Evan that he didn't have the vocation for the priesthood.
Back at Tredegar, he was notorious for fabulous parties and eccentric behaviour. And he had a menagerie in here of all sorts of creatures, didn't he?
He did. If Evan thought his party was a bit dull, he would think nothing of releasing Bimbo the dog-faced baboon to thunder up and down the corridors.
What a great name. It's great. Unleash Bimbo the dog-faced baboon. That'll give him something to think about. Rewind 40 years, and Tredegar was more famous for heroism than hedonism. When it was under the care of Evan's great-uncle, Godfrey Morgan. He had survived the charge of the Light Brigade and was a Welsh hero. I wonder what Godfrey would have made of Evan's behaviour.
His drinks bill for the weekend house party was close to £250.
So perhaps today's equivalent, 40 grand per weekend. So that was happening most weekends, a bar bill
That
around
was
about
happening most weekends.
Evan may have been in a partying mood, but the same can't be said for the rest of the country. It was the Great Depression, and along with the house, he'd also inherited the equivalent of £77 million worth of death duties. So we're in this period now of great taxation, death duties and so on, great deals of responsibility. Can he cope with this sort of environment?
He's inheriting a position where if you tighten your belt, you might get through it. Is Evan the ideal man to be Lord Tredegar at this juncture? No. In fact, he's possibly the worst possible person.
He drank and he frittered all the wealth away.
And Evan knows he's not going to have a male heir. And while the show is on, enjoy it. And it was a spectacular show while it lasted.
From Victorian boom to post-war bust, the Playboy Viscount's legacy was a virtually bankrupt estate. Its sweeping views sold off to the highest bidder, and now home to a motorway and modern housing.
Quarry Bank's glory days were also to recede into history. Under Samuel Gregg's leadership, this mill was at the forefront of cotton manufacturing. But after he died in 1834, the textile industry gradually became a harder and less lucrative business. Quarry Bank continued to work for well over 100 years, but it was becoming a relic. In 1959, the machines finally fell silent.
This is where the Industrial Revolution began. It's fascinating to visit places like Quarry Bank They remind us that in spite of the extraordinary engineering and technical innovations of the time, that it was still people, often young and impoverished, who were at its very heart.